Hello and welcome to the Alpha Anywhere demo and Q&A webcast. I'm Dave McCormick, VP of Products and Services here at Alpha Software, and I am pleased to present Dion McCormick, no relation, who's our lead solutions engineer and founder of Giant Killer Training. Also joining us today is Sarah Mitchell, who's in charge of our documentation department. Today, Dion has a brief demonstration to go over with you today, but he and we are here to answer your questions. So you can type those questions into the questions box of the GoToWebinar control panel. All right, so let's get started. Hello, Dion, are you there?
Yes, I am. Dave, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great. Let me go ahead and make you the presenter so we can see your screen. And there it is. Great.
Awesome. Well, a quick heads up, I have kind of a slow internet connection, so keep an eye on it, and obviously let me know if I start drifting or if something goes there. Won't be able to do any crazy stuff. I'll keep it nice and slow on this, but do appreciate your heads up on that. Welcome everybody for joining us. We really enjoy having you accompany us as we dive into some of the different elements of the Alpha Anywhere platform. As Dave mentioned, we have a demonstration of a key capability that I use a lot personally in my applications, and I think you'll find very, very valuable if you're not using it up to this time. One thing I wanted to point out was, again, this came from a question that came in through our guides at alphasoftware.com website or email address. And we always appreciate those kind of questions because it allows us to do a little homework, get prepared, and also make sure we're delivering content that is interesting and what people are looking for there. So we want to say thank you to people who send those in. Make sure you use that, and we will do everything in our power to answer the questions and also bring it into our webinar so we can cover it in a little bit more details. But we'll go through that demonstration there. Also talk about some of the other cool there's actually another question that came in that we'll do a very quick kind of point to it, maybe not a full demonstration, but a very interesting capability built into the grid control, which is really, really exciting stuff there. Anyway, Dave, we'll go ahead and get started right now. We are going to talk about what I like to call, or well, actually it is called, I don't even get to call it, it's called the web repository. And this is a really neat built-in feature in the Alpha Anywhere development environment that you can quickly add to your applications. And I find it's really useful, especially from a standpoint of managing what I like to call environment variables. So often when you're running a specific application and you're running in kind of different environments, development versus production versus staging, whatever it happens to be, often you want to kind of switch out different parameters while you're those environments. And this is a really powerful way to do that within the Alpha Anywhere ecosystem. If you look at most programming languages, they have some kind of environment variable structure that it makes it easy to accomplish these kind of things. Well, Alpha has the same capability here. So our demonstration today is how to set up the web repository connection, how to set it up, what it is, what are some of the cool commands, and then a real quick demonstration of how you might use it to control two different sort of environments and leverage it so that your life becomes easier and overall it's easier to manage your development process. A little bit of history. The web repository is, again, something that was built into Alpha that is really easy to implement and easy to work with. And again, as I mentioned, it's really focused around, say, environmental variables. So I'm going to dive right into the demonstration. We're going to go ahead and show you how to set up the web repository and then how to use it. And if there's any questions, go to your GoToWebinar control panel, go to the questions section and enter your questions there. And we'll try as our best to answer those during our session. If not, we can always get back to you later. After this is done, we answer some questions. I've got another thing to show you, and we'll go from there, and we'll open it up for general questions. So if you have general questions, also go ahead and put their information there. So I'm going to jump over into, actually, let me get rid of this. I think I got one too many windows open. That might have been slowing things down. So I'm in the Alpha Anywhere development environment. And at this point, I have basically an empty project. So I just went ahead and created an empty project. Now I did do one thing, is I went into my Alpha DAO connection string and I created a connection string to my database. And in this case, it's called alpha_ REPO1 for repository 1. So I've already gone in and connected or created a connection string that tells Alpha how to go connect to this database. And obviously in that database, you would have all your different tables. If you set up web security, those would possibly go in that table, etc. But what I'm going to focus on is adding what's called the web repository table and then leveraging it from there. But again, the first step is always you have to have that connection to the database because the web repository capabilities reside in a database. And you'll see in a little bit how powerful that is in terms of, multiple environments. So now that I've set that up, I'm now going to go to my project properties. And this, I'm sure you've seen this area before, but the project properties is where you can set overall project settings. Things, for instance, what style. So for instance, let's say I want to use one of the more modern styles, so I'll set that. So that sets the overall project style. You can set, for instance, well, if you're using IaaS and Alpha Cloud, the session lifetime. How long does a session stay open? And there's tons of other settings. There's settings for what libraries you use. If you're using API keys, you can set those there. And as you can see, as I scroll down into the project properties, there are many other sort of built-in functions at the project level you can take advantage of. And what I'm going to focus on is right here called repository settings. Now, what's interesting is this area over the last few years has grown because as Alpha understands how developers have been using the technology, they realize that, well, why does everybody have to build the same thing over and over? Why don't we provide sort of a centralized resource that allows people to do the things they want to do without having to build? And the repository is an outgrowth of that. So I'm going to go ahead and go into here for repository settings. And you'll notice that I have a different types, table type. I'm using SQL. That's the most normal one there. But you'll notice first it's asking me what connection string do I want to use for my repository. And very important, you don't have to use the same connection string that all your other tables are in. So this opens up a lot of really cool ways you can set different connection strings, point to different tables, etc. But I'm going to go ahead and click here. And you'll notice it opens up my repository table structure. I'm going to click here for connection string, and I'm going to select that connection. And that's the connection I built before called Alpha Repo 1. Now, the interesting thing is when I'm in development, that's the connection string it's going to use. So that's what you're going to see initially. Now, I'm going to go here to table name, and I'm going to go ahead and click on table. Well, actually, I could click on table name, but you notice when I click on it, there are no tables because I haven't created any tables in my database. This is basically an empty database structure. But what's really nice about the repository system is you can either manually create your own table, or you can do this. You can say repository, put in a name of the table. So notice I'm taking and just putting in a name here, even though it doesn't already exist. And I'm going to click create repository table down here in the left-hand corner. Now, this will automatically create the table for me. If you want to do it manually and take control of the process, you'll notice there's another link here that says show required table structure. And this basically tells you the field, the structure, etc., for the standard structure that we've created for storing this information. So I'm going to go ahead and click here. Instead of doing manual, I want Alf to do it. So I'm going to click repository table, and it's going to confirm, do you want me to create this table? And when I click OK, it is created now. So basically, it has made a call to my database, run a create table, and I'm good to go there. Now, you'll notice something that's kind of interesting here. The field map here has been automatically populated. And it was automatically populated because it's kind of all built around knowing the structure of that database. So if we look at that actually database, there will be a new table in there called repository, and in that will be a set of columns with key, object type, date stamp, etc. So these are the columns that were created in that table. Now, if you had manually created your table for this, which you're welcome to do, you would just have to click on each one of these and pick the column or field in that table to map to here. So again, the nice thing is this takes care of that all for me. It basically has done the following: is created the table, created it. There's no data in that table yet, but we're good to go. And it's already mapped the things to it. I can click OK. And now I have my repository set up. And in fact, if I go into my database environment and I go to my Alpha Repo 1, go to tables, you'll see there's my new table called repository that it created. And if I go in here, you'll see that it doesn't have any data, but it has those columns. So that's step number one, is setting up that repository table. If you had already had it, like I'll show you in a minute, I'm going to, when I have my other database that I'm going to use, you'll see it in a little bit. I don't want to have to go through that whole process, so I can just copy and paste the table and things like that. Now, if I want to, I can go into this repository table and start putting in information into this table directly. That's perfectly legitimate. But Alpha actually has a series of pre-made structured commands that allow you to insert and read data from this table. So think of it as kind of a universal repository. You don't have to write SQL commands. They're built in, and I'll show you those in a few moments. Now, there's one other thing I want to mention about the repository, which is very, very powerful, is that certain features inside of Alpha use this functionality. So one of the cool features is when you create a grid, you can actually create a sort of a search functionality in there, and then you can provide the ability for the user to save and restore searches. Well, one of the cool things about that is it uses the repository table. So if you're going to use that, you have to set up your repository table, and that's integrated into Alpha. Once you've set up the repository table and you enable it within the grid, then the grid takes care of talking to the repository table and stores like save searches and other things like that. So Alpha, we use this functionality in other components within the system to provide you that functionality. Now, what I'm talking about today is going to be more around you as a developer using this information within your scripts and within your, so there's a little scripting here, but it's very simple XBasic stuff. So with that, I've got my environment set up. I've got my table set up. I've got my mapping set up, and it's all in here. So now this project understands how to use that table. So now that I've done that, I'm going to jump over here to XBasic, and I'm going to go ahead and just go into scripting. So I have a script here. But before I do that, I'm going to jump over to the fabulous Alpha documentation system, managed and supported and really created by Sarah, who's joined us today. Does an amazing job of keeping this up to date. There's so many things that happen, so many changes, just does an incredible job there. And so I'm at the web application repository page. I'm going to go ahead and copy this, and I'm going to go ahead and put it into our chat window. So if you want to go ahead and record where that's at, you know what? I'm having a weird copy paste problem with my virtual machine. It's not pasting it. Strange. So actually, if I could avail Sarah to copy and paste that for me. Yeah, see, I copied it here, but I'm trying to paste it here. Yeah, so I've got to fix something on my virtual machine. I just upgraded. It must be a security setting there. So long story short, basically, if you go to this web address, and we'll get that over to you in a minute, it has a complete description of what I've basically done, how to set up the table, how to work with it using both XBasic and JavaScript, which is really kind of nice, which is pretty good. And we have some sample applications and videos. So if you want to do more detailed analysis and research, you're welcome to go in and do that. But I'm going to go ahead and jump right here to working with the repository using XBasic. So what's nice about it is that there are some very simple to use commands that allow you to save and restore data to the repository. And I'm going to show you those right now. Then I'm going to show you how you might want to use that in an application to create what are called environment variables. So for instance, you'll see that we have these simple ones: save to web app repository, get from it, enumerate, which actually shows you what's in your repository, and then delete. So pretty standard. Now, the cool thing I like about this the most is that when I need to read and write stuff, I don't have to sit there and write a whole bunch of SQL commands. I don't have to write a bunch of XBasic to do insert and take and do all that. It's really simplifies my life. So let's go ahead and look at save to web app repository as the first command we want to look at. So I'm going to just jump down here, and you can see we have a very simple example here. And I'm going to go ahead and copy that. It will work on here. And I'm going to go in here and I'm going to paste. And so you can see all it's going to do is it's going to do this command. it's going to put, this is the name. So think of a key value pair, i.e. in the repository, you'll have key values. And that key is essentially your primary key for how you get data from it. So in this case, what you'll do is when I click save, it's going to create a record in my repository called name, and it's going to put the name on there, Jane Smith, as the data value. Now, one thing I'm going to do is I'm going to run this, but very important, you can actually find out it returns whether or not it was successful or not. And there's ways for you to get results of what it is. It's very reliable, but if you want to really bulletproof things, you can make sure things get saved and restored properly from the system. So I'm going to go ahead and just go boom. Nothing happens because I don't have any like show var or anything else here, but I just ran this command right here. And now if I go to my database, and I look in here, I don't see it. Wait, what happened? Uh-oh, I think oh, interesting. Go ahead and do this. Show var, huh? Oh, something's up. That's actually a good lesson here. So what you can see is when I'm running that, that's not doing it here. Let's first, I wanna go back and make sure that my, not published, but I wanna go back and check my project properties. Go down here to the repository settings. Oh, it didn't save it. Interesting. Wow. No problem there. Now notice I'm just going to hit here and so I'm going to select that table. It's already been created. I'm going to auto map the fields and I'm going to click OK. So what I did is, in this case, I had that table already in my database, so I didn't recreate it. And I'm going to click OK and click OK. So let me go back to project properties. I am running on a pre-release, so it might be an issue there. Okay, it should be saved now. So let me go back here, run this, and notice what happened here. So I must not have saved my repository settings. I must have hit a cancel or something like that. But you'll notice that I was able to actually use this result, and actually I can even get more further detailed information there. But what's really nice is once you have it set up, it just works. It's pretty good. So in this case, it's telling me that this saved a web app repository, I returned true, so it's successful. And so now I'm going to go in here and you'll see that it's put in a key value, name, and the data is Jane Smith. Boom. So if I don't like that, I can go back into my here and I can click here and I'll go Sam Smith, hit there. You notice it says true. I go back into my database and you'll notice now name is Sam Smith. So you can see already that it takes away a lot of the complexity of reading and writing data because it has a standard format, it's got a pre-made function, and very handy kind of capabilities there. You also notice that it puts in a timestamp. There are other things, object type, component GUI ID, etc., user ID, that's handled by Alpha. There are ways for you to write this information into this table, and a lot of that is used internally for that save restore capability. But the reality is I pretty much just use it as a key value storage capabilities there. So I'm gonna add 2 more records for part of my demonstration. So I'm gonna go back in here and I'm gonna call this application name. And I'm just going to call this web repo app. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and make sure that runs. Okay, and then I also want to add something else. I'm going to say application environment, and I'm going to call this dev. So what I'm basically is just inserting some more key value pairs in my database. So you'll see I have 3 things now. I have my name that I created originally. I've got application name, it's called web repo app, and then I've got application environment, which is called dev. So these are just little things, I call them environment variables that I'm used there. So now let's talk about how we use this. So I'm going to use a classic case. When I go to my home page of my app, what I want to do is actually show on the home page the name of the application and what environment I'm running out. Now, I'll talk a little bit more about what I'm calling environment here, but in my case, I'm in the development environment. I have my repo1 database that I'm using for development purposes. I am going to publish this in a few moments to my development environment, and we'll go from there. So let's go ahead and demonstrate how we would now use this information in a page. So I'm going to go in here and I'm going to go to my A5W pages. Real quick sound check. Everything, is it coming through okay there, Dave? I just want to make sure. Seems fairly stable from my side, but I might have lost
Yep,
you a
coming
while.
through loud and clear. Thank
Okay.
you.
Good. I might have lost you a while ago, so I'm talking to myself, which happens in more than you really realize. So there. So I'm
We'd
going to
let
go
you
ahead and
know.
create. Yeah, please do. Like all of a sudden, why is that person calling me on my phone? Quit calling me. I'm
Exactly.
on the middle of a webinar. We've done that before. So I'm going to A5W pages. I'm going to create a new A5W page. And built into Alpha is a full, actually you can use what you see is what you get, or you can use just good old HTML kind of text. So I'm going to save this page and I'm going to call it index because this is my home page here. And I'm going to go down here and I'm going to put some static text first. So it's going to say welcome, and welcome is just, there. And now what I want to do is below welcome, I want to show the user the name of the application and the version based on my environment, or I'm sorry, not version, but the environment. So I'm going to go here, and what's nice about A5W pages, sometimes you kind of want to do something fairly straightforward where you want to integrate some static HTML. Well, you'll notice up here, we have a button here that says insert XBasic. So it allows me to put XBasic script in here and put that. Now, you don't use this a lot anymore because you build UXs, those automatically get inserted in A5W pages and the world just works. But sometimes you want to do something with an A5W page, and I thought this was just a good way to kind of show the central concept. Very important for you is that you can reference that XBasic command can be used everywhere. It can be used in here. It could be used in your XBasic classes, your XBasic functions, can be used on UXs and AJAX callbacks. Everywhere you can access that web repository information. In fact, you can even use JavaScript to do it too. So this key value pair is available wherever it is, but I'm just demonstrating it at this location here. So I'm going to insert there, and I'm going to say, I'm just going to type in here something like here. I'm going to go app name plus BR. Oops, let's go ahead and just go plus. And you'll see why I'm doing this in a moment. And I'm also going to go question mark app environment plus BR. So, and I'll explain what this all means here. Okay, oops, let's go here and here. Okay. So you'll see that now it's inserted those two little statements between these little tags here. So how this works, and it's very similar to other languages like PHP and stuff, when the alpha server serves up this page, it pulls this page in, it starts reading through it, and when it sees this, it says, whoa, wait a minute, what I'm about to see now is XBasic, so I'm gonna go ahead and run that, and then I'll continue doing the rest of the page. So it dynamically builds that page. And what it's doing is this little question mark says, whatever's behind there, spit it out as HTML. So it's sort of our way to say, take whatever you see after that question mark and spit it out. So in my case, it's spitting out this static text app name and a break, so they'll show on the different setups. So you'll see app name and app environment. I'm just throwing out those two lines. I'm going to save this as index. Okay. I'm going to come back in and add the web repository stuff in a moment, but I want to go ahead and set things up. So I've got my page, I've got my repository in my database. I want to go ahead and try and run this on my local machine. So I'm going to go here to profiles, and I've got my built-in local web root profile. This is my publishing, and I'm just going to say repo1 is my target folder because I want to publish this page and run it locally on my machine as this to show you how this works. So I'm going to go ahead and turn on the development server. Okay. So now what I'm going to do is, now that I've got that, I'm going to right click here, and it's a nice little shortcut. I'm going to right click on index, and I'm going to say publish to local web root and open. And very important, when it publishes it, it's going to publish it to a folder called repo1 and then open it there. That's my default aspects. So let's go ahead and right click here. I'm going to say publish local web root and open. It's saying, hey, this is the first time I've done it, so it's giving me a warning. I'm saying yes. And in a moment, it's taking whatever it needs, including all the supporting files, it's loading it, and there you go. Nothing super earth-shattering, but you'll notice that I have my folder, and my index. You'll notice that it says welcome. Oops, I didn't put a break there, but then it then spits out what's in that XBasic here. So that the first concept is that, with web A5W pages, you can kind of mix XBasic and the other. So let's go back in. And the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go to welcome, and I'm going to put a BR because I want to break after it. So I'll save it. I'm going to publish it. By publishing it, it sends it to the local web root, and then I'll just do a refresh, and you'll see now welcome is on its land there. Now, what I want to do is after app name, I want to put that app name in my repository, and after environment, I want to show the environment name after the repository. So what we can do is use those built-in web repository commands with the XBasic. So let's go ahead and go back into here. Well, first I'm going to go here to this page right here. Oops, not that right there. I want to go right there. I'm going to go to A5W get from web app repository because I want to read from the repository. And it's very simple. I'm going to say, actually, and I'll even simplify this there. So I'm copying that. I'm now going to go right here, and I'm going to go paste, and I'm going to go plus. I'm going to change this a little bit. Okay. Got it. All right. So you'll see that there's a very simple command called get from web app repository, and in there you pass in the name of your key value pair. So remember, for our app name, if we look at our database, it's actually called application_name. So I go back in here and I go application_name. And then for my second item, I'll go ahead and copy this here. What I want is for the app environment, I'm going to look for application_env. So I go here and I go application_env. Okay, save that, publish it, and let's go back into my browser, do a refresh, and voila. You'll see this is that static text inside my XBasic, but then what it did is it read this value from the web app repository, converted it into text, and appended it here, and did the same thing for here. So very important, in my code, I didn't have to worry what table it is, what was called, what are the values, or anything else. I had a very, very super simple way to go get this key value pair out of my database to show on it. So you can see if you have a bunch of things. Now, here's the cool thing about that is, let's say next week someone says, I don't like the name of your app, Dave. Dave, I think that's the most boring name. The marketing team comes to you and says, this is not going to stand. I'm sorry.
I hear that all the time.
Yeah. I speak from experience. Like, how about we go, you know what? And since the marketing team is run by Dave, he's like, it's got to be called Dave's web app, web repo app.
Not anymore. The marketing team is Amy.
So, actually, it should be. let's make it the true power behind the throne, Sarah's web repo app. So you'll notice what I did here is I updated my database. Now I'm going to go back, and I don't touch alpha. Go back in here. And there you go. So this is actually pretty handy to kind of store what I call, environment variables, or things that can change. So you could have a whole bunch of these things. And whenever you need to modify, you just go into that table, modify it. The next time the app runs, literally, it will pull that data out. And that could be, and I'm using it here for things on the screen, but that could be URL endpoints for other systems. It could be anything there. Now, this is where it gets really interesting and really fun. So I'm going to do the following. First thing I'm going to do is just go into my database, and you notice I have a second table here, our second database called Alpha Repo 2. So the idea behind this is Alpha Repo 1 is my development database. Alpha Repo 2 is going to be my production, which I should have probably used the name on there, but got a little Russian this morning. So, okay, so I'm going to go here, and I'm just going to copy, and I'm using Navicat. I'm copying that repository table over to my other database. And in that case, it copied not only the table structure, but also the data that we have already established here. So now on my production database, I have a copy of my database, and I have a set of information here. So now that we've done that, I'm going to say, great, I've finished with development. I'm ready to go to production. So production is considered a different environment. It's going to, and even though I'm going to run it on my local machine here, most usually it's going to be up in Alpha Cloud, or it's going to be on IIS server. It's going to be somewhere else. It's going to be where people can access and where it's a stable environment that you can use. So I'm going to go to my profiles. And right now I have a single profile called local web root, which is targeting my local folder. So now I'm just going to go add new profile. It's another local one, although it's probably going to be ISP or Alpha Cloud. And I'm going to call that there. I'm going to click to do there, index page, and finish. Okay, and I'm going to call this, we'll call it just production is what that's going to be called. So now I've got my local one here, and now I have production, and the target folder is actually going to be repo 2. Okay, so anytime I publish to my local machine here, it goes to repo 1, but when I hit here and publish using production, it goes to repo 2. And thus it's going to run out of that folder, which again, technically would be on a different machine. So I haven't changed anything else. I haven't changed my web repository settings or anything else at this point in time. So I have to do one other thing that's very important. When you create a new publishing profile, I want it to do two things. I want it to go to a different destination, what I've been talking about so far. In my case, a local folder that's different. But if I could say, no, I want to go up to Alpha Cloud, etc. But I want to do one other thing that's super important. I want to tell it, when you're running in production, I don't want you pointing to repo number 1. I want you to point to the other database, because that's where my production database is. So I have to do one thing that's very important, is I have to go in my project profile, select production, go to the named alpha DAO connection strings, and you'll see there's my connection string. And currently it's using the default value. So what that means, if I were to publish it right now, it would publish fine. It would give me a warning, but it would say, but what would happen is when I ran it in that new environment, it would be pointing at the default connection string, which is repo 1. But in my case, I don't want it. I want it to actually point to repo 2. So I'm going to go ahead and edit this connection string. I'm going to edit the default value, and I could actually go into build connection string here, and I can say, you know what, instead of alpha repo 1, use repo 2. And I can test that to make sure it works and click OK. And so you'll see now it basically copied my previous connection string, and then I edited it to point to the different database. So now what that means is when I publish locally, my application is going to look at alpha underscore repo 1. When I publish to my production environment, it's going to look at repo 2. Okay, so we now have our new publishing profile for our new environment, in this case, production. And I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to publish this to that production environment. And I want to go ahead and launch my index page. So now I'm going to click publish. It's telling me, hey, the first time I published there, I've got to set it up. Oh, you know what? That looks wrong. Check that out, everybody. Ooh, that's not good. So let's go ahead and notice it appended the A5 web root. So I'm going to cancel real quick here. I'm going to go up to profiles, go to production, go here, and I want to get rid of that front part because it will append the current directory. That's kind of a strangeness based on me doing the same machine here, but let's go ahead and do there. So now let's go ahead and do the publish. All files. We'll launch the browser with index. Now you'll notice it's showing me the right location, that everything should be under C5A web root repo 2. Technically, yeah, otherwise it would have caused an error and we wouldn't have gotten things to work. So very important, always actually read the warnings. They actually can be very handy. It's a little word of the wise. But it's telling me I've never done this before. I haven't published here, so that folder doesn't exist. So we're going to go ahead and create the folder, publishes it, and now I'm running. Notice that my URL is my localhost machine name with repo 2 to index. This one is localhost. Well, it's got the machine name, but it's repo 1. Okay. Now I'm going to hit refresh here, and I hit refresh here. Now you'll notice that it's showing the exact same message. And the reason there is that even though it's reading the two different databases, my two different databases still have the same values in it. So let's change that. Let's go into our database environment. Let's go into repo 2 here. You'll notice, I'm pointing to alpha repo 2. I'm going to go in here and I'm going to change this to production as the environment. So I'm going to leave the application name the same, but I'm going to change the environment variable to be production. So now I'm going to go back in here. Okay, this is my repo 1. Watch when I hit the refresh button. It still shows me Sarah and Dev. I'm going to go here to repo 2, and I'm going to do a refresh. And now notice what it says. Same app name, but the production app is our app environment now is production. So the neat thing about that is that when the application runs using the web app repository, I can have 2 different sets of, think of them as environmental variables, that on the fly I can use to tell my XBasic to do different things. In this case, it's very simple. And actually, I use this a fair amount. I want to know on my home page, because often I can't read the details here. I want to, basically tell the person they're in dev or production. So I'll throw that up as a message on the index page. So when you're logging in, you get that familiar look. And the neat thing about that is that that's all automatic. Before, what I'd have to do is say, well, if I publish to this environment, publish this index page that says production, and then when I go to here, publish this page which says development, but that becomes a nightmare to manage. More importantly is that if I'm using different services, let's say I'm using different API endpoints to do certain things, or there's different like default values for one environment over the other, or something like that, then I don't have to worry about maintaining it in my project. I can put all of that stuff into the web app repository tables, and then on the fly, pull that information out in there. Here's a classic example. You'll notice here that I have a certain URL. It's machine name, yada, yada, repo1 index file. Here I have a different URL. Now, often, for instance, I'm sending out a reminder for someone in an email with a button or a link that says, click here to go back and check information, load this web page on my environment. Well, how do I on the fly make sure when I send that message out, I append the right machine information? So what I do is I will go in here, I will add a new application repository item or web app repository item that says like URL. So it has the URL, sort of the full like the front end of the URL, so that when I do anything later on, I don't have to worry about like putting in my XBasic code, well, figure out what environment you're running on, do here. It just pulls it out and says, oh, when I'm running here, I'm using that URL versus this URL. So there's some really neat ways you can use this to make your life easier. And more importantly, make your applications basically be data driven, where you have a core set of code, core set of functionality, and it basically on the fly, depending on the environment you are, it looks at those web app repository values and can then modify its behavior at that time. You'll find that over time, your life becomes simpler, and it's very simple. Like if I go to a new environment, let's say I want to set up a UAT or staging environment, but I don't have to go in and write a whole bunch of code. I basically create a new publishing profile that goes to the new location. I create a new database. In that database, I modify the web app repository settings, and that allows me now to have that new environment. Everything just works. It just pulls the right data at the right time, and I'm good to go. So the web app repository is very easy to use, very flexible, but gives you a lot of opportunities to help you kind of take all that environment variable stuff out of your logic, out of your system, and put that into a place. And again, I've focused on environment variables, but there's many other places. You can just use it as sort of a scratchpad place, like the name of the app or this or that, so that it's super simple to set up. And where I've seen it is, let's say I support 3 or 4 different people using the same application. They're going to have different deployment locations. Well, I don't have to spin up a new version every time. I just send the same version out to those, but then point them to different web app. And therefore, when they log in, it says Joe's app, Jane's app, Bill's app, and it looks much different, even though I haven't even like, oh, what is the URL of the logo? Like, let's say I want to have a different logo on the homepage. Well, I could store that logo in here, the sort of the URL or name of that logo. And then when I do it, then it's going to pull up that logo in this environment versus others. So I guess I hope I'm not beating a dead horse here, but I really enjoy using this capability. It's very easy to set up. Once you get the feel for it, you're just never going to go back. It's really super handy. And with that, I will go ahead and open this up for questions by anybody. So I hope that makes sense.
That's great. And it looks like you answered just the first question, which could you set an image name? And as you pointed out, yeah, you could have a different company logo or something else on the page just by
Yep.
reading it out of the repository. Couple other questions here. One has to do with, he said, well, you're showing stuff from a repository. So this isn't exactly a repository question, but it has to do with
Oh, no problem.
showing stuff on the screen. So is it possible to show information like an IP address or the operating system on a web page in that?
There is a set of information you can locate.
Mhm.
Um, and where you would look for that, I believe you get that all out of the context. So
Is
let's
that
go
in
ahead and look up
context? Yeah.
context. I'm pretty sure it's in the context. Um, when you were doing desktop apps, basically, you could query the operating system directly. But since we're using web apps, you're actually querying the web browser, and you're going to be limited by what the web browser will give you. But in the context area, let's see, I think it's the context object. Here we go. Okay, so, and again, I apologize, I can't copy and paste that. So if someone, Dave, if you can look that up and paste that in, that'd be great.
Sure.
But the context object is sort of that way to query. So you'll notice there's different types. There's context request. It contains everything about the current HTTP request, the response, and then you have security and session. So a lot of our session and other things have managed there. So I believe it might be, let's go ahead and see here. Nope, I think it's under request. Yep, so this is where you'd go to find some of that information. So what happens is what an HTTP request is the browser sends a request to the server, and in there is a whole bunch of information that is helpful for the server. And when you receive that request, there's a whole bunch of data that you can get in there about where that request is happening, from like what is the application route, which is the absolute physical path on the application on the server. There's a whole bunch of other, you can get cookies out of here. This is kind of where we get the form data. So like if someone submits a form, you can get the form data out of it. You can get the header information. So I would explore this area, and you can get things like IP address and other things like that. And I know I've seen that on the forum. There's some good examples on our alpha forum. So if you haven't checked out, go check out there. But you would look within there and it would give you a lot of the information, because all that information is sent to the server by the browser, and then the server can take that information and use it however it wants. Like for instance, so anyway, that look on the request area or the context area and there, and you'll be able to find those kind of information there. And that's useful for security, like if you want to record the IP address. Also,
Mhm.
just to let you know, the actual Alpha application server also can store that information. There's logging built into the application server that is useful. And that's useful for like checking if you're getting denial of service kind of attacks and other things like here. So there's ways to do within your code. And then there's also logging functionality within Alpha. Now, be careful that when you turn on certain logs, all of a sudden these logs get big very, very quickly, because basically every message that goes to the server gets extracted and stored to a disk file. So you only want to use it probably short term for certain situations or testing or things like that. So.
Excellent. Thank you. Okay, so question back to the web repository, and this has to do sort of with scope. So are the values stored in the web repository, are they on a session by session basis, user by user basis, or are they just across the whole application no matter who's using the application?
They're across the whole application, and they're
Okay,
not session. Every time you call that, there is a little performance penalty because it's calling the database
yeah.
and getting that information. And it's smart. It's very optimized for there. But the beauty of that is, you noticed the moment I went in and changed this value, and the moment I went here and did a refresh, it instantly refreshed it because it pulled that new data out of the database.
Mhm.
So it's different from session. Session is managed by the server, and you kind of read stuff into session until you reset that, it stays it. But here's another benefit of this. Let's say my session times out. Well, this
Mhm.
will still run. It doesn't require a session. I mean, obviously, if it's a secure page, it's going to not allow you to see that page. but
Yeah.
I don't have to worry about managing session. That's all going to be done on there. And the other is that session variables, they're just tricky. You have to be a little careful about using session variables, especially
Mhm.
when you have multiple tabs open. You got to make sure you don't do something that causes a problem.
Right.
Good
And we
question.
had talked about other techniques to avoid those sorts of problems, like the use of
Arguments.
arguments,
Yeah.
for example. Right. So that
Yeah.
kind of answers this other related question, which is this technique used for multi-tenant purposes? And I'd say it could be used in a multi-tenant
Yes,
application,
absolutely.
but maybe not for multi-tenant purposes because the data is the same for each of the logged in users. So you're not storing
Right.
anything unique to that particular person.
Yeah,
Oh,
and that's a really good point. There's sort of two methods to do multi-tenant. Method
huh.
number one is you have one monster database and then you tag things by organization or tenant. And there's actually some really cool features built into Alpha now, which we have to do a presentation on, where we can actually manage some of that for you so you don't have to worry about your code. Your code can be dumb. It can just do all these queries and then we'll filter it. So we'll have to do that. Actually, that would be a really cool one to do sooner than later. The other way to do multi-tenant is that each person or each tenant has their own database. Now, this works really well for that second environment. I'm
Hmm.
moving towards that multi-database. There's a problem with that is that if, let's say, you update your system and there's database changes and you have 100 tenants, you have to run through and update all those databases. You just don't make it change once and there. But the
Yeah.
benefit is you don't have to worry about mixing people's data and having a mistake where all of a sudden someone is seeing someone else's data, which I'm
Where
super paranoid on.
data bleeds
Yeah.
through, sure.
And
Although there are
and the
some
tenant,
also some tricks in Alpha I think that you've shown before that can prevent that from happening by requiring that a valid user ID always be present with a request.
that's
Uh,
correct. That's
the
correct.
trick.
But I've noticed the world is really moving towards multi-database tenant scenario. And
Huh.
for one is security. The other is that certain customers will say, do you mix my data? Okay, I can't do business with you, which is bad. You lose business there. There are also other customers that are like HIPAA and everything else where that's a big no-no. And so there are certain things that prevent you from even commingling data just from that standpoint. But the other thing that's an advantage is that a
Right.
lot of the modern tools like Navicat does this, but the one I really like is called DB Forge. So for instance, I've got two databases here. So let's say this is the production or the development one, and I make some changes to this database. Then I have 5 different of these other databases. Well, what you can do is you can run an automatic compare of your new database structure to what it was in the past. It will generate a non-destructive update script, and you basically
Hmm.
hit that script, and your new database looks like your development one. So technology has gone a long way towards making your life simple. So if you were to say, okay, we're moving everybody to version 2, and there's database changes, and we've got 20 databases out there, well, you can run these scripts that run in a matter of a few seconds or a few, like a minute on each one of those databases, and boom, those databases now look exactly the same, and you're good
That's
to go.
great.
So,
And that
yeah,
tool is called DB Forge, is that correct?
yeah. And again, we make no money from this, but there are many. There's like Redgate and other ones,
Okay.
but let's see, DB4. The one I've used a lot. I've just found it's really nice, and not very expensive either. It's basically like Navicat. Navicat does it, but I've never really liked Navicat's schema comparison. It just doesn't give me the warm and fuzzies. And when you're doing this, but you'll notice you have a database compare and sync, and basically it will compare 2 sides, sync it. But the most important thing about it is you can either hit go and it will just do it and sync up the database.
Hmm.
More importantly, what you can do is say, okay, save this as a script, and then it will save it as a SQL script, and then you then can
You
run
can
it
do
at
it
any
sometime
time.
when your system is offline or something, where you're doing maintenance or
Exactly.
something like that. Yeah,
Yeah.
great.
So,
Wow,
but
very cool.
just a little nuance inside baseball on how you do it. But I tend to lean towards multi-database. The only time it gets a little funky is that, let's say, in this you have to consider, let's say I have an administrator and they need to look at 2 organizations' information. Well, do I create 2 different logins and this and that? That's kind of where you run into little items where the multi-database kind of starts to create some other issues. But from a safety and security, I just feel more comfortable with one organization's data in one database. Therefore, you never have to worry about someone going, whose social security is that?
When it bleeds through. I
Which,
think
by
we
the way, I
probably
wouldn't
all had
suggest you
that happen
store in
on
there
even on a
anyway.
professional app. I remember even Fitbit going, "Whoa, I got like 30,000 steps today," and I was like, "Oh, it's not me."
Exactly. The bizarro world, Dave.
Yeah, it is. So yeah, there's an issue. Cool. Okay,
Oh, real
another
quick. Oh,
repository.
actually, I apologize.
No.
While we're on that subject, real quick,
Uh-huh.
is I'm going to go. Oh, did I go the wrong one there? Let's go here. Um, tenant. Let's see if I can find that article. I want to go ahead. If you're uh, this article right here, building multi-tenant applications dynamic connection strings. That's one way to do it with connection strings. And
Hmm.
there's actually a new feature, and I forget where that is. And this, we're going to do a webinar on this, everybody. What is it? Oh, maybe it's not. It's actually when you build a connection string. Let's go alpha DAO connection screen new.
Hmm.
I think it's in here. Let's see, multi-tenant. So let's actually go back and search here for multi-tenant. There we go. Okay, so this is called multi-tenant connection. So if you notice in my connection string here, I basically have pointed to one database and one information there. But the multi-tenant's cool. It adds a layer on top of this. And again, we'll do a demo so people get to see it a little bit more. But what it does is in your environment, let's say you say select star from customers, like you have a grid where you're showing all the customers. Well, what will happen is the grid will say, okay, I want to get that list of customers. So it says, what connection string? Okay, goes to connection string. It says, oh, okay, I'm going to take that SQL and I'm going to call this database. And what I get back, I'm going to show the user. And it can include filtering and everything else there. Well, what the multi-tenant does, which is really cool, is it adds a layer in there that you still in your grid, you say select star from customers. But then what happens is it goes to this tenant, and then behind the scenes, it says, oh, you're in a multi-tenant. Well, I'm going to add this extra part of my command that goes back to the database that says where like organization is equal to 123 or whatever it happens to be. And so therefore you don't have to change your queries in your application. They basically get layered or modified. So then therefore when a data comes back from that database, it is selecting star from customers, but it's added that extra layer. So we'll go through and do a demo very soon on that, because this then allows you to keep to a single database and have it much easier to manage multi-tenant applications, because you don't have to worry about everywhere where you do any kind of SQL or in your grids or in your list, you don't have to worry about appending that select or that where from this organization ID. It takes care of it for you. So it's kind of a cool way to do that. If you're not too concerned about mixing people in the database, this is the way you want to do it. You want to use multi-tenant, a multi-tenant connection, and it will make your life a lot easier. And we'll do a demo soon.
Wow, very cool. Thanks.
Yeah.
So now in your example today, the data that you were showing on the screen was being pulled from a backend database. I didn't pay attention. It was MySQL or SQL Server or whatever,
In
but
my case, MySQL, but it's
MySQL. Okay,
the same
cool.
for
But so, but you went in and you entered the data into the database that way. Would it be possible to create your application so that an administrator on a web page
you.
could update those values in the
Yep.
repository?
Yeah, because the reality is this table, and that's a very good point, is just a table in there. So I can go into my application, I can say new web component, and then I can go to I can either create a grid or a UX with a list control. I'll just do grid just for speed
It's
purposes
faster.
here.
Yeah.
And then I'm going to go to my query. I'm going to select connection. I'm going to click connect, select. There's my table there. Go to my fields, add these over there. And now you wouldn't add all of them because you don't want to modify the key. So let's make this editable. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to say select none, but I'm going to make data editable. So you'll notice everything is a label except for
Yeah.
the data, because that's all I want them. I don't want them changing my keys. It will break things. So now I have this grid in here that you could present to a administrator, and they could go in and modify those. Now you may not want them to modify certain ones of these. So you can, by the way, you're welcome to modify that table by adding new columns and stuff. So you may want to add a column that says customer changeable, and then filter this grid on it. We don't care. All we care about is that those base fields are mapped properly and you don't muck with them, because Alpha expects them to be there when we do those calls. But yeah, you're right in here. You go in here and change this, test, click submit. That wrote that table. Let me go back in here to here. And let's see. Actually, let me go back here. Cool. And we'll submit that. Go back here. And notice that changed it right there. So absolutely, that's really nice to allow them to dynamically change, like what's the header image. What they can even name the app themselves, or they can upload. They could put a URL to an image there that they want to use as the image for their app. So great point, and thank you very much for bringing that up. You can make it self-managed.
Very cool. In your repository table, I noticed that you had a field for user ID and I think even security groups. Can you tell me what that's about?
Yeah, those are currently really just used by the internal functions. So for example, what I was talking about, when you have a grid, when you enable save and restore searches, it uses the web repository. The component GUI ID is the ID of that grid, so it knows, oh, this is the saved search. And then the user ID is the person who saves it. So those columns are really used internally.
So that's what they're used for, but they're really used by Alpha behind the scenes and aren't really meant for people to adjust or even look at. Is that kind of the deal? Okay.
And again, you could go ahead and wrap your own function that uses the to modify this yourself, but you start drifting away from just the super simple function calls that it provides. So I don't muck with those. I just use the key and the data columns, and that's all I really mess with, and makes life easy.
Excellent. All right. So I guess we have time for one last question here.
Sure.
And this has to do with Apple sometimes being a little too helpful. And this person has a page that contains a search field called artist name, and it's defined as a lookup, as an edit combo list, and it pulls from an alpha DAO query from a database. So if you start typing in a name, it does the auto suggest, which is great. The problem is that Safari, beyond just suggesting what's in your database, also tries to be super helpful and suggest what's in your contacts database for that particular computer that you're on. It's trying to be helpful in that way. Do you know of any way to stop that from happening?
I know.
Not offhand. Okay, I think that's worth looking into, though.
Yeah, that is, whoa.
Safari's used a lot. Yeah, what a pain in the neck. Yeah, I know exactly what you meant. I find that those autofill fields frequently don't behave as I would expect. And I don't mean the ones in Alpha Anywhere. I mean any autofill field where you're using on iOS. So we can do a little research for you. If you want to send that email, send it over to guides@alphasoftware.com. We'd be happy to share with you the answer that we find and share it with the rest of the group. Let's see, we have a couple of votes here for you doing a webinar on multi-tenant.
So I think that would be fun.
Great. Yeah.
It's actually not very hard to set up. I mean, it's very well thought out. And again, it's all built in. So, but yeah, it's worthwhile walking through how to do that. I think you'll enjoy it.
Cool. Here's another question. This person created a repository for testing, but now they don't actually want it. How do you remove it? It's probably just deleting a table at that point, or do you have to undo something Alpha as well?
You have to do two things. One is delete the table out of the database, but also make sure to go into your project properties.
Yeah.
And then go down to the repository settings and clear this out so that Alpha doesn't know it's there. And then of course, if you've written commands anywhere in XBasic or where else, you'll have to track those down. But just as a quick and easy, watch, you can go to the Web Projects Control panel, go to Edit, Search in all web project files. So you go to Edit, Search in all web project files. And then I can go Repo. And what it does is it searches everywhere and will find
look at that
text.
Perfect. Yeah.
And so then I can go, oh, I got to go index and remove that stuff because it's there. And when your apps get really big, sometimes you've renamed a function or you've realized there's a bug and you want to go find other places you use that. This is your lifesaver. And
that is a cool feature. I did not know that we had the ability to basically go right through those files. Yeah,
exactly.
Search through those files. Neat.
And if you want to, you can sit there and say edit object, and it takes you right there. It doesn't necessarily take you to the line but it
It happened
opens
to
a
you that
topic.
time, but yeah,
But what's nice is it keeps this open. So once you fix that one, you could do a research and it will update the results. So it's very handy for that. I got to find a bunch of stuff and fix it.
fantastic. Oh, that's so cool. Dion, thank you very much. We have
No,
come to
thank
the
you.
end of our session. I want to thank everyone who attended, especially those of you who asked questions.
Great
And if you
questions.
do, they were great questions. If you have further questions, please send them to guides, GUIDES, at alphasoftware.com, and we will be happy to answer them. Thanks again, everyone. Hope to see you next week. Take care and stay well. Bye-bye.